We are all more than the worst thing we have ever done. A million years ago, I was at a meeting at a legal nonprofit called the Equal Justice Initiative in Montgomery, Alabama. And as I was walking out the door of EJI, that quote, "We are all more than the worst thing we've ever done," was on a piece of paper up on the wall. I had never seen it before, and I have remembered it ever since. The quote is from the Catholic nun who was the hero of Dead Man Walking. Remember that film with Sean Penn and Susan Sarandon? Susan Sarandon's character was based on Sister Helen Prejean, who's probably America's foremost anti-death penalty activist. And at that time, this is about 10 years ago, I was 11, just kidding. This is about 10 years ago. At that time, activism against the death penalty felt like one of the all-time great American lefty lost causes. I mean, the enthusiasm with which states were killing their prisoners at that time seemed unstoppable. After the Supreme Court legalized the death penalty in 1976, check this out. We went from 0, 1, 2 prisoners being killed a year by the end of the 70s to the mid-teens at the end of the 80s to almost 100 people being killed per year at the end of the 90s. To argue that the U.S. should stop killing its prisoners at that point was like shouting into a wind tunnel. But now, at the end of the 2000s, look at that. The number of prisoners we are killing is dropping by a lot. And for only the second time since 1976, when the Supreme Court said the death penalty was constitutional, for only the second time since then, an American state has just made capital punishment illegal. 5 days after both houses of his state legislature passed a bill outlawing capital punishment, facing a midnight deadline by which he had to either veto the bill or sign it, a governor who had been a lifelong proponent of the death penalty decided to spend last Wednesday afternoon, first at Catholic Mass, and then at the state penitentiary, the pen that held his state's lethal injection chamber. Heading back to the state capitol that day, the governor made what he said was the most difficult decision of his political life.
Regardless of my personal opinion about the death penalty, I do not have confidence in the criminal justice system as it currently operates to be the final arbiter when it comes to who lives or who dies for their crime. If the state is going to undertake this awesome responsibility, the system to impose this ultimate penalty must be perfect. It can never be wrong.
Joining us now is the Democratic governor of New Mexico, Bill Richardson. Governor Richardson, thank you for your time tonight.
Thank you very much, Rachel.
You have been a proponent of the death penalty in the past. You said you changed your mind because of a lack of confidence in the judicial system. I have to ask if that means you believe in the death penalty in theory, but not in practice.
Well, yes. My personal view is that in the most extreme cases, the most heinous of crimes, the death penalty is applicable. However, as a public official who has to decide in upcoming cases, I felt that the alternative presented to me, life imprisonment without parole, was possibly even a tougher alternative. I saw the prison. I saw those cells. The last 10 years, 130 exonerations of death row inmates, mainly minorities in our prison system. I also saw flawed DNA evidence. I read about prosecutorial abuse. And I think in good conscience, I felt that as a leader in my state, I couldn't impose a personal view that I had in the most extreme of cases. So I decided to look at this alternative, which seemed very viable. And after going to Mass, after searching my soul in what you described as my most politically difficult decision, and after visiting a prison where I saw very, very dire conditions for individuals on death row and in a level 6 prison, I decided that life imprisonment without parole was a better alternative. And then I saw us internationally, America isolated as one of the few countries with the death penalty, saddled along with other repressive regimes that had the death penalty. I said, I want to be in my state somebody that ends the death penalty but still has an alternative so that we can tell our law enforcement officers, the men and women that go out and defend us, that there is a punishment, that there is a deterrent.
The law that you have signed is not retroactive, and there are 2 men who are on New Mexico's death row right now. Their fate is sort of unclear. Why not commute their sentences if you don't have faith in the system being able to act perfectly in this case?
Well, Rachel, the law is prospective. It starts July 1. I have to honor that. And these 2 individuals, I think, are on death row, and one of them, in my judgment, still deserves the death penalty for the most heinous of a crime in killing a police officer. So I'm not going to look back. I feel that my decision is prospective. By the way, with these individuals, they could get off, they could have a life sentence of possibly just 20 years, which would be less severe than life imprisonment without parole. So I'm not going to deal with those cases. I think those are valid. They should go through their own legal process, and the law in New Mexico will be prospective, and we will join New Jersey as the 2 states that have recently initiated repeal legislation.
Governor, I know that there are term limits in New Mexico. Your 2nd term ends next year. You won't be running for governor again unless the term limits law changes. Did that affect your decision-making here? Do you feel like this is a big political risk?
No. You know, I consulted a lot of people as I made my decision. I talked to law enforcement officers. I had constituent hours. Over 200 people came to see me for 5 minutes expressing their view on a variety of subjects, in addition to the death penalty. I had close to 74% individuals contacting my office through phone calls, through the web, through the internet. So I felt I had to make a decision talking to as many people with a different point of view as possible. No, you can't have politics look at a decision like this. You got to do what's right. You know, the consequences when you make a tough decision, you're always making people mad. But I felt that a majority of my constituents, as is America, is moving in the direction of repealing the death penalty. The world has moved ahead of us. Europe, Latin America, most nations have repealed it. And I think the time has come to take those steps as a nation. And I, in my small way, contributing in my state of New Mexico, taking that decision, but not saying there is not going to be a death penalty. The alternative, life life imprisonment without parole, I think is a very, very severe penalty, too.
Governor of New Mexico, Bill Richardson, thanks for making time to us tonight. Thank you.
Thank you.